At my sister's wedding. My parents asked me to hand over the penthouse. When I refused, my mother slapped me. That's when I decided it was time for revenge. Madison Hayes. Senchar. Arrived at her sister's wedding, expecting to celebrate family. Instead, she became the center of a public confrontation that would expose years of financial exploitation and fundamentally alter her family dynamics forever. The Grandview Hotel ballroom was spectacular white roses, gold accents, and 200 elegantly dressed guests gathered to celebrate Sophia Hayes' marriage to Brian. Madison had contributed $50,000 toward making her younger sister's dream wedding a reality, though this generous gift would never be publicly acknowledged. That dress, couldn't you have chosen something more feminine? Her mother, Carol, greeted her with characteristic criticism. You look like you're heading to a board meeting. Not your sister's wedding. The navy silk dress Madison wore was elegant and appropriate. But in her family's eyes, it represented everything wrong with the eldest daughter, too professional, too independent, too masculine in her choices. What her family didn't know, what Madison had deliberately kept private, was that she wasn't simply attending as a dutiful sister. She was attending as vice president of development at Hayes Capital, one of the city's most prestigious investment firms, overseeing the company's entire Asia-Pacific expansion, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But in her family's narrative, Madison remained the disappointment, unmarried at 32. Too ambitious, and somehow less valuable than her younger sister Sophia, whose traditional choices aligned perfectly with their parents' expectations. The reception appeared to proceed normally, until Madison's father Richard stood to make an announcement, tapping his champagne glass. He silenced the band, and commanded the attention of 200 guests. Before we continue celebrating, he began through the microphone. Carol and I want to give Sophia and Brian something special. Madison's stomach dropped as she realized what was about to happen. That's why we're thrilled to announce that Madison has graciously agreed to give Sophia her city penthouse as a wedding gift. The room erupted in applause. Sophia's practiced surprise fooled most guests, though her slight smile revealed she'd been informed of this gift beforehand. Every eye turned to Madison, expecting grateful acceptance of this beautiful family gesture. But Madison hadn't agreed to anything. What her parents had orchestrated wasn't a generous offer, it was a calculated ambush. They'd made a public announcement about private property, leveraging social pressure, and the wedding setting to force compliance. Refusing would make Madison appear selfish and cruel in front of her entire professional and personal network. I'm sorry. What Madison's voice carried clearly without amplification. Her father's confident smile faltered. Your penthouse, sweetheart. For Sophia and Brian. This wasn't discussed with me, Madison stated, maintaining professional composure, despite her racing pulse. The room's energy shifted immediately. Whispers rippled through the crowd as guests recognized they were witnessing not a heartwarming moment but a family conflict playing out in real time. Don't be selfish on your sister's day, Richard said, still holding the microphone, to ensure everyone heard his characterization of Madison's resistance as unreasonable. Dad, this is inappropriate. We can discuss this privately. Carol grabbed the microphone from her husband. There's nothing to discuss. It's a wedding gift from the family. It's my property, Madison replied simply. And I haven't agreed to anything. To understand Madison's refusal, it's crucial to understand what that penthouse represented. It wasn't simply expensive real estate, it was tangible proof of a decade of extraordinary professional achievement accomplished despite, not because of, family support. The 4,500 square foot penthouse on the 45th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, had been featured in Architectural Digest. Madison had purchased it through her executive compensation package after closing a deal that netted Hayes Capital $40 million. But her family had never believed in her success. When Madison mentioned living in a penthouse, relatives laughed, assuming she was exaggerating. When she spoke of her career achievements, they changed the subject or minimized her accomplishments. How's that little apartment of yours? Her Aunt Sally had asked earlier that day, prompting laughter when Madison corrected her. They genuinely didn't understand or didn't want to acknowledge that Madison had become extraordinarily successful without their help or approval. In their minds, she remained the disappointing older daughter who prioritized career over marriage and family. The penthouse wasn't just property. It represented 10 years of 80-hour work weeks, international negotiations, and strategic decisions that had made her one of the most respected executives in her field. Surrendering it would confirm their narrative that Madison's achievements were disposable. that her success was somehow less legitimate than traditional markers of feminine accomplishment. As Madison continued refusing, family members joined the pressure campaign from their tables throughout the ballroom. "It's just a property," Richard insisted. "You can buy another one." "Then you buy her one." Madison replied, a response that drew gasps from the crowd. Sophia's tears were perfectly timed. "Madison, I thought you'd want me to be happy." "Your happiness doesn't require my home." "Sophia." The confrontation intensified as relatives added their voices to the chorus of disapproval. "You don't even have a family to fill it," her Uncle Tom called out. "Sophia needs it more. She's getting married, starting a life." Another guest added. "What do you need all that space for?" The collective pressure was designed to crush Madison's resistance. Every comment reinforced the same message as an unmarried woman. She didn't deserve the space she'd earned. Her sister's traditional life choices made her more worthy of Madison's achievements. But Madison had negotiated with CEOs in boardrooms across 3 continents. She'd stood her ground when millions were at stake. She wasn't going to surrender to family manipulation. Regardless of how many people joined the attack. "The penthouse is not available," she repeated with finality. What Madison's family didn't initially realize was that Brian's younger brother had been live-streaming the entire reception to Facebook Live. The confrontation, including every accusation and dismissal, was being broadcast in real time to a growing audience. Madison's phone buzzed with a message from MC Marcus Chen, her CEO and mentor, who also happened to own 40% of her father's company. A fact Richard didn't know. Saw the live stream. On standby. The message read. Marcus had insisted on protective clauses in Madison's penthouse purchase agreements specifically to guard against family coercion. At the time, Madison thought it excessive. Now she understood his wisdom. "Wait for my signal," she texted back. The confrontation reached its climax when Carol descended from the head table, still clutching the microphone, her voice booming through the speakers. "Madison Hayes, you will not ruin this day. You will not embarrass this family. I'm not the one creating a scene." "Mother." "You ungrateful," Carol caught herself. Then switched to forced sweetness. "Sweetheart. Just give your sister the keys. It's such a small thing." "No." The single word hung in the air like a challenge. Carol's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and humiliation as 200 guests watched. Then, without warning, her hand connected with Madison's face with such force that Madison's head snapped sideways. The slap echoed through the ballroom's acoustics, amplified by the microphone Carol still held. Madison's diamond earring, a gift she'd purchased for herself after closing the Singapore deal, flew off and clattered across the marble floor. 200 guests gasped in unison, then fell completely silent. Madison stood perfectly still, her cheek burning, as the room processed what had just happened. The photographer had stopped shooting. Wait staff stood frozen. Even the children present had gone quiet. In that moment, reflected in the ballroom's mirrored walls, Madison made a decision. She calmly walked to where her earring lay, picked it up, and carefully put it back on. The simple action took perhaps 30 seconds, but felt eternal. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Congratulations, Sophia. I hope your marriage brings you joy." Then Madison Hayes walked out of her sister's wedding reception, pulled out her phone, and gave Marcus Chen a single instruction. Green light. 45 minutes later, Marcus Chen entered the Grandview Hotel ballroom in his signature $10,000 Armani suit, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys carrying briefcases. Richard Hayes recognized him immediately. This was the man he'd been desperately trying to schedule a meeting with for 6 months. The CEO of Hayes Capital, the silent partner who controlled 40% of Richard's company. And, as he was about to discover, Madison's boss and mentor. Carol's scream, when she recognized Chen, could be heard 3 floors up. "Richard," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that made board members defer without question. "I need to clarify something for everyone present. Madison Hayes is not just some employee at my company. She's our vice president of development, managing our entire Asia-Pacific expansion." Collective gasps rippled through the crowd. "That's impossible," Richard protested weakly. "The Singapore deal that netted us $40 million, Madison led that. The Tokyo office, that's now our most profitable branch, Madison built that from the ground up. The partnership with Samsung that your company desperately wanted. Madison negotiated every detail. You're lying. Carol's voice was shrill with panic. Mrs. Hayes. Your daughter is one of the most valuable executives in this city. The penthouse you tried to take, it was part of her executive compensation package. A package that includes certain protections against coercion. Marcus pulled out documents and laid them on the head table. Furthermore, as someone who owns 40% of your company, Richard, I'm deeply concerned about the judgment you've displayed tonight. Publicly attempting to steal from your own daughter. Allowing your wife to assault her. This raises serious questions about your leadership capabilities. You can't, this is family business. Richard sputtered. The moment you made it public and live-streamed to 20,000 viewers. You made it my business. The number stunned everyone. 20,000 people had watched the confrontation unfold in less than an hour. Marcus's intervention triggered immediate and far-reaching consequences that no one in Madison's family had anticipated. That live stream shows clear assault and attempted coercion. Marcus explained. This triggers Clause 15. 3 of our shareholder agreement. Richard. The one about moral turpitude. And conduct unbecoming of leadership. He explained that he could call an emergency board meeting within 24 hours. Combined with other shareholders who were already expressing concern. Richard's position was suddenly very precarious. You have 48 hours to issue a public apology to Madison, a real one. Not PR nonsense. You'll acknowledge her professional achievements and her right to her own property. Carol. You'll do the same, and stay away from Madison permanently. Or what Carol demanded. Or I exercise my options as a major shareholder. Your company needs my capital for the expansion project. Without it, you're looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. The business consequences began almost immediately. 3 of Richard's major clients contacted him within hours. Having seen the viral video, I'm concerned about what I just witnessed. We need to discuss our contract. Jim Patterson. Patterson Industries. This is deeply troubling behavior. My wife is insisting we reconsider our partnership. David Kim. Kim Electronics. I don't do business with people who hit their children. Contract terminated. Sarah Williams. Williams Logistics. That last message represented a $3 million annual contract gone. Brian's family. Equally horrified by what they'd witnessed. Put the wedding on hold, pending family counseling. They wanted to understand what kind of family dynamics they were joining before fully committing to the marriage. Within a week, Richard's company had lost 6 major contracts. The expansion he'd been planning for 2 years was dead without Marcus's capital investment. Downsizing became inevitable. The video went viral across business networks nationwide. The narrative was clear and compelling. Successful daughter refuses to be bullied by entitled parents. CEO intervenes to protect valuable executive from family exploitation. The response was overwhelmingly supportive of Madison. Comments flooded social media. This is why we need more women in leadership, someone who won't be pressured into giving away what they earned. That mother should be arrested. That was assault. Plain and simple. The CEO stepping in to protect his employee. That's real leadership. Richard issued his legally required apology exactly 47 hours after Marcus's ultimatum. I apologize to my daughter, Madison, for my inappropriate behavior at the recent family event. I acknowledge her professional achievements and her right to her own property. This matter is now closed. Carol refused to apologize. Instead, posting a social media rant, calling Madison ungrateful and corrupted by corporate culture. The rant was widely screenshot and shared. Usually, with comments like I see where the problem started, and narcissist mother spotted. From Madison. The most unexpected consequence came from her own company. Marcus called her into his office, the Monday following the wedding. The board wants to promote you, he said. Senior VP of Global Operations. The way you handled that situation, protecting company assets. Maintaining composure under extreme duress. That's exactly the leadership we need. The promotion came with a 40% raise and substantial stock options. Madison donated the signing bonus to a women's shelter that helps abuse victims leave toxic situations. 6 months after the wedding incident, Madison's life had transformed in ways she never anticipated. The senior VP position led to a feature in Forbes 40, Under 40. Her professional network expanded globally. Most importantly, she'd established boundaries that protected her peace and well-being. She changed her penthouse locks immediately and provided building security with a list of people permanently banned from the property, her parents' names at the top of that list. The family she founded, Hayes Capital, became her real family. Marcus and his wife invited her to regular family dinners. His daughters, both college students, looked up to her as proof that women don't have to compromise their ambitions for anyone's comfort. Sophia's marriage to Brian lasted 4 months. The mandated counseling revealed deeper issues: entitlement, inability to take responsibility, expecting others to provide for her lifestyle. The divorce was quiet but final. Through mutual business contacts, Madison learned her father had begun therapy. Her mother continued her victim narrative. But most people who'd seen the video knew the truth. Madison blocked her immediate family on all platforms, not dramatically, but quietly, removing their access to her life and achievements. Story 2. Thanksgiving. My brother slammed me into the wall. I was bleeding and tried to fight back. Dad grabbed me and said, "I dare you to touch it." My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 26. And the night my father yanked me off, my brother and hissed, "He's the face of this family. Touch him, and you'll regret it." I understood I had never really belonged to them. It happened at Thanksgiving. The kind of dinner people post about with glossy photos and captions about gratitude. Ours opened like a commercial: a long table, the good china, the rosemary turkey. My mother basted every half hour, like a ritual, and ended like a police report. My brother, Mason, had just been handed another glass of Pinot and another second chance. He was the golden child. The story the family liked to tell itself: handsome, effortless, charming when he felt like it. He toasted our grandparents' legacy, grinned for the cousins' phones, kissed my mother's cheek. Everyone laughed a little too easily. I sat at the far end by the air vent, where the draft makes your ankles cold. I felt it even through thick socks. It started when I asked a question that didn't belong to dessert. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't jab the knife. I just said, "I heard the company signed the new shares under Mason's name. Is that true?" The knives paused. The table breathed in. Mason's smile slipped just enough for me to see the metal underneath. Dad blinked once and reached for the gravy boat as if the weight of it could keep the room on script. "This isn't the time," he said, like a weather report. Mom focused on her plate, cutting green beans into perfect halves. I should have known to keep quiet. For as long as I remember, fairness at our table meant silence. But I'd been carrying the question for weeks, and it rattled like coins in a dryer. "I'm part of the company too," I said. "I put in the same hours in the warehouse this year. We said we'd talk about ownership." Mason stood slowly, napkin dropping to the chair like a white flag. Nobody meant. He walked the length of the table, the way he used to pace before a game, shoulders loose, making sure you noticed. He stopped behind my chair. "You don't get it," he whispered, so only I could hear. "You never get it." Then he pivoted me by the shoulder, hard, and slammed me into the wall. The plate clattered. The framed print of Lake Superior tilted. The buzz in my ear came first, then the metallic taste. My lip split. I tasted salt and the sweetness of cranberry like a bad joke. I reacted hands up. Not even to hit back, just to stop the second blow, and that's when my father grabbed me from behind. The grip was practiced. A football coach's hold. His breath smelled like the Pinot he pretended not to drink. "He's the face of this family," Dad said against my ear. "Touch him again, and you'll regret it." The table went silent enough to hear the heating kick on. My mother still didn't look at me. She folded her napkin into a smaller and smaller square. "If you want to know how we got there, you have to start earlier." With mornings that never made it to any scrapbook. At 6:00 on a winter weekday, when I was 8. Mason pushed me down the basement stairs for making him late. I remember the clock because the digital numbers were stuck on the old microwave we kept next to the washer. 6:00. Blinking after a power outage. I remember how the laundry basket bounced past my head like a plastic comet. I sat on the last step, trying not to cry because boys don't. Because sound travels up through vent grates. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, rope tied tight. "Don't pick fights with your brother," she said. "You know he's under a lot of pressure." Her voice had the same softness she used with the good towels. She turned away before I could show her the bright scrape on my shin. We were late anyway. At school, I told the nurse I'd fallen. She gave me 2 Band-Aids and a sticker that said brave in bubble letters I couldn't peel off straight. At 10:00 on a summer night when I was 12. Mason held me down on the carpet to teach me respect. That's the phrase he used when he pressed my shoulders into the fibers so hard my skin burned afterward. The TV flickered with a rerun of a game we'd already watched twice. Dad walked in. Took in the scene, the pinned elbows. My red face. Mason's hands and nodded like a judge. Good. He said to Mason. He needs boundaries. Then. To me. Learn your place. Son. I learned that respect meant I had to laugh when jokes landed on me. Family meant my feelings could be walked off like a sprained ankle. Afterward. Mason tossed me a warm can of soda and said. We're good. The carbonation stung my throat. And I said yes because I wanted the house to unclench. We didn't talk about injuries. We talked about outcomes. When Mason accidentally hurled my first phone into the driveway so it exploded into black and silver confetti. My dad handed him the spare keys to the SUV for a late-night snack run. My mother pressed a $100 bill into my palm and said. We'll figure out the rest. Maybe this will help. The repair was $129. 99. I used leftover birthday money for the difference and told the guy at the kiosk it was my fault. Every bruise came with a lecture about my place. You're the steady one. Mom would say. Smoothing a collar that didn't need smoothing. You don't need attention. Mason does. That's not a flaw. It's a burden he carries because people look up to him. When I made the honor roll. The certificate got clipped to the fridge for 2 days. Right above the mustard jar, we never finished. When Mason sank a last-second 3. We had a backyard cookout. And neighbors came over with lawn chairs, like it was a national holiday. Sometimes, I tell myself it wasn't all bad. Because that's what we do to survive. There were nights Mason and I would share a bowl of cereal on the porch and trade stupid jokes. And he'd clap my shoulder and mean it. There were mornings, Dad and I changed the oil in an old Civic together. His hands guiding mine as if he was passing down something real. There were rare afternoons, when Mom and I baked cornbread, and she hummed under her breath. And I thought if I moved softly enough, nothing would tip. Those moments were breadcrumbs leading me back to the table. They kept me trying. Even when trying. Made me smaller. Still. The pattern never changed. The summer I was 15. Mason borrowed the money I'd saved from stocking shelves at Harrow's Market, $312 tucked in an envelope labeled camp, then shrugged when I asked. I'll pay you back. He said, without looking up from his screen. He didn't. Dad said. If your brother needed it. There was a reason. Mom said. We're a family. Ethan. We share. I asked to see it that way. I failed. By the time I turned 21. The words "he's the face of this family" felt like a branding iron. It was coded into every choice. When the company Morgan and Hale Logistics back then offered 2 entry-level spots. HR told me my interview was excellent, but there was only 1 opening left. Mason started the next week with a corner office just until the remodel's done. A joke. Nobody thought was a joke. I started on the loading dock for $18 an hour. Nights. Because somebody had to. I liked the work. The honest ache of it. But I told myself the dock was a doorway. I kept volunteering for projects. Replying to emails at 2:14 a.m. Sending little reports with bullet points and proposals. Good initiative. My supervisor wrote once in a reply, all. Mason forwarded me the thread with a thumbs-up emoji. So when I brought up the shares at Thanksgiving, it wasn't just about paper. It was about every time I'd been told patience is a virtue, and humility is its own reward. It was about that mustard jar, half hidden behind the cranberry sauce. The one we hauled out every holiday even though no one used it. A condiment that had become a prop. I stared at it while my lips stung. And Dad's words wrapped around my ribs. He's the face of this family. I thought. There has to be another sentence after that. There wasn't. I left that night. I didn't slam a door or announce anything. I stood. Grabbed my coat from the banister. And walked out into the brittle air. The porch light hummed. A neighbor across the street wrestled with a string of lights tangled like seaweed. In the car. My hands shook on the steering wheel. A little tremor that made the key miss the slot twice. As I drove. Dad's sentence looped over the white noise of the tires. He's the face of this family. He's the face. He's the face. Like a slogan on a billboard for a product I couldn't afford and never wanted. I slept on a friend's couch for 3 nights. The cushions smelled like detergent and chili powder. I showered at odd hours and tried to keep my thoughts. I told myself I was overreacting. That's what we were trained to think if you're hurt, and you say you're hurt. You're dramatic. On the fourth day, I found a small apartment with thin walls and a view of a brick alley. The landlord wanted first and last month's rent. Plus, a security deposit $3. $000 total. I wrote the check and thought about the $312. The $129. 99. All the little losses that add up to a story. And yet hope is stubborn. It's keyed, but it stays. A week later, I went back to the house for my wallet. I could have asked someone to mail it. I could have cut my losses. But some part of me still wanted one conversation where we said the right things. The driveway was empty. The house had that hollow sound homes get when no one's moving inside. Like a seashell. The attic door was open. A thin string dangling down. The kind of detail you either ignore or accept as a sign. I stood at the bottom of the pull-down ladder and listened. Nothing. I told myself I'd be in and out in 5 minutes. I should have known 5 minutes can open a lifetime. I should have known that going up that ladder would lift more than dust. But I climbed anyway. Palms picking up powder from the wood. Heart doing that slow drum it does before thunder. On the beam near the hatch, someone had penciled a line from years ago where Mason and I measured our heights. His name was written in big block letters. Mine was squeezed into the corner because we were running out of space. I touched the faint graphite and thought of that microwave clock blinking 600. Up there. The air was warmer. Boxes breathed that tired attic smell. Old paper and cedar. The first box I opened was labeled, Photos, in my mother's careful script. Inside Mason's first steps. Mason's first day of school. Mason's birthdays. Our family smiling in a set of years where I can't quite place myself. How could I be present and missing at the same time? I turned a page and found another party I barely remembered, except for the cake lemon. With frosting, my mother made from scratch. The one she only made for special. Mason had his arm around Dad. I held a balloon string in the corner. Half cropped by the frame. I turned more pages. Aware of the attic door and the silence below. A chill slid under my shirt. In a second box, beneath 2 photo albums and a stack of fundraising flyers for Mason's team, I found a manila envelope. It was the kind you buy in packs of 10. Slick to the touch. On the front, documents. I felt that small, foolish hope. Flare. Again. Maybe this was where my birth certificate lived. The proof I was woven into the family record the same as everyone else. Proof is a funny thing. Sometimes you think it will soothe you. Sometimes it burns. But that's ahead of the story. For now. For the sake of chronology. Keep me in that attic. Crouched on the itchy insulation. A smear of dust on my thigh. Listening to nothing and everything. Holding an envelope that weighed more than paper should. Downstairs. The fridge would be humming. The mustard jar would still be cold. The script we had lived by would be waiting where we left it. My hands didn't shake anymore. Not then. Not in that moment when the hinge of my life was a simple metal clasp I hadn't yet unfastened. I set the envelope on my knee and stared at my name written in blue ink across the corner, Ethan, and I thought. Maybe this is the start of a different sentence. Maybe he's the face of this family finally meets its answer. I didn't know the answer yet. I only knew that for the first time in years. A second voice rose in me. Quieter, but steady. Saying open it. Find out. Then decide who you are to these people and who you are without them. I took a breath. The kind you measure, so you don't make noise. And slid my finger under the flap. The envelope cracked when I opened it. The way old paper does when it's been sealed against truth too long. Inside were certificates stacked with a precise, almost fussy care. My father's version of tidiness. The kind that hides. Not organizes. The first thing I saw was a birth certificate. My name Ethan Cole. My father's name Robert Cole. Clear as summer sky. But under mother. Not the name of the woman who raised me. A different name entirely, Lydia Hart typed in a font that made time feel brittle. A different hospital. 2, St. Bridget's. 2 towns over. Not the place whose gift shop mug I'd seen in our kitchen since forever. The date was the same. The time the same. But the room number wasn't. A small note in blue ink along the bottom margin read. Copy requested May 12. 2006. My mother would have been arranging the spring fundraiser that week. I tried to picture her in line at the Vital Records desk. I couldn't. I should have known. I told myself. And immediately hated that sentence. How could I have known? There are lies you can feel because they grate against your skin every day. And there are lies you carry like a stone sewn into your coat lining. You don't notice the weight until you take the coat off. Under the certificate stood a legal document, 3 clipped pages. Stamped and initialed irrevocable trust agreement. The Hart Coal Fund. I read slowly. Lips moving. Because I needed each word to be real. The sum of $2 million, $2. Ling ling ling. 0, 0. 0 is hereby transferred in trust for the benefit of the minor child. Ethan Cole. It listed the trustee Robert Cole. It specified investment guidelines. I only half understood. References to municipal bonds and laddered CDs. Reviewed annually. It said the principal could not be invaded. It said the interest and gains would accumulate until distribution on the beneficiary's 18th birthday. 18th. I'm 26. My birthday passed 8 times since the date typed under termination and distribution. I pressed my thumb to the embossed seal, like I could wake it up. There was a letter tucked behind the last page. Folded along the lines where grief goes to rest. If we cannot raise him together. Lydia had written in a hand that leaned forward like it wanted to reach me. Make sure he does not pay for our mistakes. Promise me he will have choices. No signature. Just her name typed beneath. A lawyer's name was stamped in blue at the bottom. From a firm downtown that advertises during the evening news. I sat back on the rough planks and listened to the house. Even empty. It made the old rhythms, the slow clunk of the furnace kicking in. A pipe ticking somewhere in the wall. The fridge motor's brief sigh. None of those sounds knew anything about me. None of them had changed. Even now. When everything else had. I slid the letter into the inside pocket of my jacket without deciding to. Some things you keep close before you know why. Under the trust. The envelope held a handful of copies, tax forms. Correspondence, acknowledging receipt of the funds. Annual statements stamped received with my father's tidy checkmark inked in the corner. The numbers were clean and clinical. A string of interest accruals. That might as well have been street addresses. To a life I hadn't lived. 14% one year. 6. The next. A note referencing a market dip. The spring I broke my wrist on the basketball court. I remembered the cast. The itch under it during math class. I didn't know a ledger was recording a parallel history. My throat tightened the way it does just before you cough. 2 million. I said aloud. Testing the shape of it. It didn't sound like money. It sounded like time. College choices I didn't consider. Apartments. I said no to because the deposit was too high. The night shifts I took, so the savings account wouldn't flatline. It sounded like the extra shifts I watched men in their 50s take on the loading dock. Eyes red. Back stiff. Because rent doesn't care about birthdays. Beneath the papers lay a small plastic case. No larger than a deck of cards. On the label. In my father's block letters, Archive Q. 4. A USB drive slid into my palm. Warm immediately, as if it had been waiting for skin. I almost laughed. A small, humorless sound. My father didn't label things unless he planned to find them again. I stood, brushing dust off my jeans, and told myself I'd look later. Then I told myself that later is a place built for cowards. I took the drive. His study downstairs always smelled like lemon oil and careful anger. It was the one room he ironed the curtains for. The desk lamp snapped on with that satisfying click older lamps have. I slid the USB into the port. Heartbeat in my throat now. And the monitor blinked awake. Folders filled the screen. HR, complaints. Board, notes. Press, drafts. Another folder with Mason's initials and a date 5 months ago. I clicked the first because it was right there and because I wanted to be wrong. The complaint files read like a chorus of people trying. For months and years. To be heard. Inappropriate comments during review. Intimidation rescheduling. Physical contact, shoulder shoves. Names I recognized from the warehouse and HR. Dates I remembered, because those were the weeks Mason had walked around the office with that extra bounce. The one that said he'd gotten away with something. Attached PDF scans of signed forms. Each one stamped in red ISSUE handled internally. In the margins of several. A comment bubble with my father's initials. Coaching provided. No further action. Remind about brand implications. I clicked an email thread and felt the floor tilt. From my father to HR. Please keep this quiet. Mason's reputation cannot take another hit this quarter. Another. Too legal. We will manage this without formal escalation. Strateg mentorship. Media monitoring. Another. The subject line, a single word that tasted like metal. Contain. I scrolled. My father's voice on the page was the same measured tenor he used when lecturing me about responsibility. About how men absorb impact, so others don't have to. Only here, it had a different weight. Like he was explaining a weather system he believed he controlled. The subtext wasn't even sub. Protect the brand. Protect the air. Clean the spill without letting anyone see the mop. Then I saw my name. A thread to a lawyer named Denby that included a scanned document, as you'll recall. Lydia Hart signed pre-birth relinquishment of parental rights. If Ethan ever inquires about the trust distribution, we will assert it has been expended on his upbringing, housing, education, food, medical. Keep in mind we have not maintained a separate trail on this. Per your advice at the time. I stared at the sentence, we have not maintained a separate trail until the words blurred. The cursor blinked. Patient. My scalp prickled as if I'd just walked into a too bright room. I should have known. My mind offered again. And I pushed it away harder this time. Knowing is not the same as proving. And childhood is not consent. I copied the entire HR complaints folder onto my own drive. Then the legal emails. Then anything with Mason's initials. The progress bar crawled. The small white light on the USB pulsed like a distant heartbeat. On the bookshelf. A framed photo of Mason at a charity luncheon watched me with its glossy grin. I tilted it face down. My reflection flashed in the glass for a second before it went dark. I saw the cut on my lip. The line of dust along my jaw, where I must have wiped with the back of my hand. The part in me that still wanted my father to walk in and say, "Son. Let me explain. Was quieter now." As if it understood explanations were always going to be instructions. When the copy finished, I ejected the drive and stood in the doorway of the study. Listening again. The house offered no verdict. In the hallway. A box labeled tax. 2004. 2008 crouched on a low shelf. I slid it out and sifted. Deposit confirmations to the trust. Correspondence, acknowledging annual reviews. One note with my father's handwriting across the top margin. Remind Denby no paper trail. The letters were firm and straight. He'd written the same way on the chalkboard when teaching me how to do long division. Patient. Steady. Like precision, was love. I carried the envelope with the trust. The copy of my birth certificate. And the USB to the door. Paused. Then went back for the letter from Lydia. I didn't know her. I don't know if she liked lemon tea or strong coffee. If she laughed at the wrong times like I do. If she hated late winter the way I do because it feels like being stuck in a waiting room. But I knew she had written choices. And that word threaded a rope across a chasm. Outside. Dusk was settling in purple strips along the edges of the street. I sat in my car for a minute and breathed. The air smelled like cold, and the distant sweetness of somebody's laundry vent. My phone screen lit. A text from an unknown number, "Call me when you can. I think you should see something." No name. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and stared at my hands on the steering wheel. They weren't shaking. Back at my apartment. I spread everything on the cheap kitchen table, the certificate. The trust. The letter. The copied files. I drew lines on scrap paper like I was mapping a city dates. Names. Amounts. Armayuan. 000. 000 principal. Termination at 18. 8 years overdue. HR complaints spanning 2 fiscal years. Legal advice referencing no receipts. The math wrote an answer in a color I didn't like. I called the number. A woman answered on the first ring. Voice low. "Ethan," she said. "This is Mrs. Klein. I taught you in 7th grade. Social studies. You had the notebook with the state flags taped on the cover." Her voice brought back the smell of dry erase markers, and the way sunlight had slanted into room 204 inches late afternoons. "I filed a report about your bruises once," she said. "Your father called the board. I was encouraged to drop it. I didn't. I kept copies. If you want them." There was a pause that wasn't quite silence. "You should have had help then." I closed my eyes. "Where can we meet?" I asked. We set a time and a place Tuesday. 1030 a.m. A coffee shop between our neighborhoods with terrible parking and great muffins. When I hung up, I realized the tremor that used to live in my hands had moved. It wasn't fear. It was velocity. I emailed myself the files. Printed hard copies. Slipped them into a thrift store briefcase I'd bought for $8.99 because I'd liked the brass clasps. I backed up everything on a second flash drive and hid it in a Ziploc under the freezer drawer. The way my grandmother used to hide spare cash. I made a list of what to pull next: property records, board meeting minutes, employee reviews. I wrote down Denby's name and the dates that appeared next to his signature. Then I wrote a sentence and underlined it twice. Don't tell them what you know until you can show them. It wasn't vengeance that kept me at the table past midnight, drawing arrows between boxes. It was the shape of a story I could finally read, honestly. My life had 3 columns now: what they did, what I was told, what actually happened. The first column was long. The second was loud. The third was catching up. In ink. Near 1 in the morning. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. A photo came through small. Grainy. A child's wrist with a faint half-moon bruise. Then an audio clip, a man's voice raised. Door slamming. A child crying. Ethan. A text followed. This is Anna. We haven't met. I'm Mason's wife. The next line formed slowly. Like she had to force each word through. He is getting worse. The room went very still. The streetlight outside threw a pale trapezoid on the floor. I could see dust motes turning in it like snow in a globe. I typed, "Are you safe?" 3 dots pulsed. Then stopped. For now. She wrote. Can you talk? I said yes, and sent her my number. When the phone rang, I answered on the first vibration. Her voice was the sound of someone who has been holding breath for too long. I have videos, she said. Texts. Voicemails. He says he'll take everything if I leave. She whispered like the walls had ears. It's not just me anymore. Our daughter, her breath hitched. She's afraid to go to sleep. Go somewhere safe, I said, startling myself with how steady it sounded. Tonight. I'll meet you wherever you choose. And send me everything. The words fell into place like sandbags along a rising river. This was no longer only about me. Or even about the money. It was about the pattern repeating with smaller, softer people who never asked to be proof of anything. After we hung up, I gathered the papers into neat stacks. Checked the locks twice. And stood at the window. Looking at my reflection layered over the dark. The cut on my lip had stopped bleeding. In the glass, I looked like someone I could stand to be for a while. Somewhere in the building. A neighbor laughed at something on TV. Down on the street. A cat darted along the curb. Ordinary noises. They didn't know a fuse had been lit. I should have known. Yes. But what mattered now was what I would do with knowing. I made coffee I didn't need. Sat down. And started a new list. At the top, I wrote a different sentence, the one Lydia had left for me without knowing it would be mine to finish. Make sure he has choices. Then I added a time: Tuesday. 1030 a.m. A place. A plan. And one more line underlined so hard the pen almost tore the page. Bring the truth into a room that has microphones. Tuesday. 1030 a.m. The coffee shop buzzed, with the soft thunder of milk steamers and laptops. Mrs. Klein sat by the window with a folder on her lap and a canvas tote at her feet like she was guarding a seedling. She looked older. Because everyone does, after a decade. But her eyes held the same alert kindness that had once made an entire row of 7th graders sit up straighter. When I approached, she stood as if a guest had finally arrived after a long delay. Ethan, she said. And the way she said my name made my shoulders loosen half an inch. We sat. A server brought water without being asked. Mrs. Klein smoothed the folder. I worried they'd get rid of these, she said. I worried I'd lose them. So I made copies of the copies. She gave a short laugh that wasn't amusement. I guess that makes me paranoid. Or prepared. She opened the folder and slid a stack across the table. Forms with district letterhead. Photos of faint bruises on my forearms. Each one dated in black marker. Each one circled like a teacher, tying a bow around a fact. A narrative report written in precise, neutral language. Student presented with contusions consistent with It described the conversation we'd had in her classroom after school. My dodgeball of answers. The way I wouldn't quite meet her eyes. At the bottom, a notation. Case closed by board following family request. A single line that had pushed an entire truth off the page. You were a good kid, she said. Serious in a way kids shouldn't have to be. I remember you memorized all the state capitals and didn't want extra credit because you said it wouldn't be fair. She watched my face to see if I'd argue with her memory. I didn't. The board chair called me. He used that tone people use when they think they're being reasonable. He said, we don't want to damage a family's reputation over misunderstandings. He didn't ask for mine. I swallowed. Outside, a man in a delivery jacket balanced 2 pastry boxes on one hand and a phone on his shoulder. It struck me as obscene that the world could keep going while your entire past was being laid out in Arial font. Thank you, I said, for keeping these. I wish I'd done more, she said softly. But I can do this now. She reached into the tote and produced a flash drive in a small Ziploc. Scans. The originals stay with me unless a court asks. You understand? I do. I slipped the drive into my pocket next to Lydia's letter. It felt like the handle of a door. We talked logistics. The coffee went cold while we made notes. Who had jurisdiction back then? Who would now? When an old complaint becomes part of a new pattern. She wrote down the name of a nonprofit that helps document abuse and workplace cover-ups. I wrote down a direct number to an advocate who answers after hours. We agreed that none of this replaces police or courts. But both can be slow and allergic to nuance. So para gel tracks matter. When we stood to go, Mrs. Klein touched my sleeve. Whatever you do with this, she said, don't do it alone. The bell above the door jingled when she left. And I watched her cross the street with that purposeful stride. I remembered from fire drills. At 1112 a.m. Anna texted a location pin. A park near a church where the parking lot faced a row of trees. 15 minutes. She wrote. We'll sit near the playground. I have a friend with me. I drove there with my briefcase on the passenger seat, like a second person. The sky was the bleached white of late winter. The wind had the kind of edge that makes you question your coat. Anna wore a beanie and sunglasses and the kind of neutral sweater people wear when they're trying not to be seen. Her friend. A woman about our age, with a nurse's badge on a lanyard tucked into her jacket. Stood slightly behind her like a wall with eyes. A little girl in a pink coat with a fox on the pocket sat on the swing. Kicking at the gravel with the toe of one boot. Humming to herself. I stayed far enough away to be non-threatening and close enough to be useful. Anna's voice was hoarse from a night of not sleeping. She extended her hand like we were meeting at a parent-teacher conference. This is Lila, she said, nodding at the child. And this is my friend Priya. The nurse's gaze measured me and filed me under probably safe, for now. Thank you for meeting me, I said. It felt ridiculous to be polite. But politeness is a bridge you sometimes need to get across the river. Can we sit? We chose a bench where we could see the playground and the lot. Anna took out her phone and unlocked it with fingers that trembled only when she pressed play. The first video was a hallway view. A door out of frame slammed. Mason's voice filled the little speaker. Hard and controlled the way, a storm can be controlled when it knows the land. I said we are not doing this. He snapped. A small voice whimpered. Anna's camera shook and steadied. I'm filming this to remember, she said quietly. And that line reached into me with cold hands. The second clip was shorter. Just audio. You walk out and I take everything. I will bury you in court. Then the sound of a fist on a table or a wall. The small voice again. My stomach dropped the way it does on an elevator. We went to urgent care 6 weeks ago. Priya said. Clinical. Because clinical keeps you from dissolving. I documented the wrist. I documented what Anna said. We can pull the records. She looked at me. She's been saving everything. I told her to. People don't believe what they don't have to hear. Anna scrolled through texts. Showed me screenshots of threats, couched as parental concern. Of schedules moving like goalposts. She had voicemails with the stamped time codes, and a note app where she'd written dates like prayers. She'd emailed herself from a secret account. She'd bought a pay-as-you-go phone and stored it at Priya's place. She had done what people tell you to do when you're told you're dramatic. She'd built a museum of the ordinary cruelty. Where are you staying? I asked. With me. Priya said. For now. We have a plan to move her to a shelter if we need to. But those are full and complicated and... She stopped. We'll make it work. Lila dragged her feet to slow the swing. The chains squeaking in a rhythm. The fox on her pocket smiled forward like it didn't know the rest of the shirt. Good. I said. Keep copies off-site. Give me a set. I handed Anna a new 128 gigabytes. Flash drive still in its packaging. Upload everything and text me when you're done. We don't move until we're ready. But when we move where there are microphones. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and dread. What does that mean? It means the company's annual gala is in 4 days. I said. And your husband is getting a Family Values Award. I watched the words hit. Then settle. They're going to pack a room with donors and board members and press. They'll have a slideshow. They'll have a sound system. They'll have a stage. I didn't say the rest out loud yet. Some sentences you build slowly, so they don't collapse under their own weight. Anna's face tightened. He'll be there. So will your father. Exactly. I said. And if we go through channels first? Those channels will be used to drown us out. But if we make the channel the room... I let the sentence trail. Lila hopped off the swing. Ran to pick up a stick. Examined it with the seriousness of a scientist. Anna watched her with an expression that made my throat ache. I don't want her to hear any of it. Anna said. She won't. Bria said. Stepping closer. We'll arrange childcare. We'll position ourselves. If we do this, we do it with precision. We set about the bones of the plan right there on the bench. It was less Ocean's 11 and more spreadsheet. I would pull additional corporate records minutes from the last 6 board meetings. Any upcoming press drafts. I'd find out who the AV contractor was for the gala, and where the tech station would be. I'd prepare a packet with the trust. The HR complaints. Mrs. Klein's documents. Select screenshots of Anna's material redacted where necessary to protect Lila. Priya would help us phrase captions that stated facts without stepping into defamation traps. Anna would record a short statement on video in case security removed her or nerves froze her throat. We would notify exactly 2 journalists in advance, people with ethics and spines, and 1 advocate who could post the material if the room cut the feed. We would keep copies in 3 places. We would not improvise once we were inside. At 1:40 p.m. I left them with a checklist and a hug that felt like placing sandbags against a flood. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a reminder I'd set earlier. County Records. APT 230. I drove downtown. Parked in a garage that smelled like antifreeze. And took the elevator to a room where boredom goes to be alphabetized. The clerk behind the counter had a sweater with a reindeer on it and a name tag that said Clarissa. Property records, she asked. Not unkindly. Years I handed over a list, the company's parcels. My father's investment properties. And a couple of shell LLCs I suspected were just new names for old habits. She clicked and printed and clicked again. And every so often, she said. Who? Which in that office might as well be a siren. By 4:10 p.m. I had deeds showing transfers timed just before fiscal quarters closed. Liens released with astonishing speed. And a lease on an apartment downtown that lined up perfectly with the date a former HR manager had resigned to pursue other opportunities. I added sticky notes with dates in the same tidy hand I used to copy vocabulary words. The picture sharpened patterns of silence subsidized by patterns of money. I stopped at a copy shop on the way home and scanned everything into a cloud folder, with a name that would bore a thief. Back at the apartment. I opened my laptop and wrote a script for the slideshow. That wouldn't be the slideshow they expected. I kept sentences short because shortlands. I added title cards. Resolved internally. Family request. Handled off record. I cut the audio clips so they were clear but not sensational. The point was not to shock. The point was to make denial impossible. At 6:30 p.m. I called an old friend who freelanced as an event tech. You still doing corporate gigs? I asked. Ever sub for the Marriott Ballroom? He laughed. All the time. Why? I said I needed a name. Not to get someone fired. Just to make sure a file got played when it was time. He gave me a number and a warning. Those guys are loyal to whoever tips and doesn't make their life harder. At 7:05 p.m. I reached out to 2 reporters, one at the local paper who'd written about labor issues, without turning workers into props. One at a regional outlet who covered corporate governance like it mattered. I didn't send files yet. I asked a simple question. If a company presented an award to an executive while evidence of abuse and cover-ups ran behind him, would you show up? One replied within 6 minutes, if the evidence is solid. Yes. The other wrote. This sounds significant. Can we talk tomorrow? I slept for 4 hours. The kind of sleep that feels like being dropped into a well. At 3:20 a.m. I woke with a sentence in my head. You only get one first time telling the truth in a way that people cannot look away. I got up. Made oatmeal. I didn't want. And wrote it at the top of the plan. The next day was logistics and redundancy. I met with a pro bono attorney recommended by the nonprofit. We reviewed phrasing and exposure. You can't accuse the company of crimes on stage, she said. But you can present documents and ask questions. We built a call sheet, if security shut us down. If the feed cut. If someone tried to grab the laptop. If Mason tried to bluff. We rehearsed the possibility of panic, like firefighters practicing a drill. Anna texted near noon. Files uploaded. Off-site copies with Priya. We're okay. I sent back a thumbs up and then. Because the small human parts matter. Tell Lila, the fox on her pocket is the bravest fox I've ever seen. A minute later. A photo arrived, Lila holding a drawing of 3 stick figures and a fox. All standing under a sun that took up a third of the page. I put it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. At 5:50 p.m. I stood outside the hotel where the gala would be and watched staff wheel in crates labeled AV Main. I caught the tech named by my friend during a cigarette break behind the loading dock. He clocked me in a glance, not a cop. Not a donor. Not a problem yet. I handed him an envelope with a crisp $100 bill and a USB in a case labeled Gala Revised Slides. From Mason. I lied without blinking. Last-minute changes. He doesn't want a fuss. But he'll be furious if it's wrong. The man eyed the bill as if weighing its honesty. Then he took the drive. We always aim to please, he said. And flicked ash into a coffee can. I walked away slowly. Like a man who had done nothing more consequential than drop off a dessert. Back home. I lined up our contingencies on the table until the edges squared and the corners matched. I ironed the shirt I would wear because details count even when the world is burning. I set 3 alarms for the morning and 1 reminder that read, breathe. Speak. Don't flinch. When I finally turned off the light. The room held the quiet of a theater, 1 minute before the curtain rises. I should have known my life would split into before and after in a banquet hall under bad chandeliers. But this is how it happens more often than not with an explosion. But with a series of small, stubborn acts. A teacher who doesn't throw away a file. A nurse who writes down exactly what she sees. A mother who presses record. A son who refuses to be told that family is where truth goes to be buried. Somewhere in the building. My neighbor laughed again at something I would never see. I closed my eyes and pictured the stage. The screen. The rows of round tables. And the moment the room would hear a sentence, it couldn't swallow. The ballroom at the Riverside Marriott smelled like waxed floors and ambition. Waiters glided between round tables set with centerpieces shaped like little lighthouses. As if the company wanted everyone to believe they knew how to guide ships through storms. A banner above the stage read Morgan and Hale Annual Gala in a font that wanted to be timeless. Near the podium. A glossy plaque waited under a cloth. Family Values Award. I arrived early enough to watch the AV crew test the projectors. The tech I'd met behind the loading dock gave me a brief nod and the professional blankness of a man who will do the job he's been paid to do and ask no further questions. I stood at the back wall where the banquet staff park extra chairs. Holding a program with names arranged in a hierarchy, you could feel. I circled Mason's name with a pencil I didn't remember putting in my pocket. Guests filtered in, board members in tuxedos. Partners in satin. Employees in their nicest suits, trying not to look at the price of the floral arrangements. Laughter rose and fell in practiced waves. My father moved through the room, the way a man moves through a house he built, touch a shoulder. Squeeze a hand. Alina Koflink. He looked good, the way photographs look good, when the lighting is right. He did not see me. Anna texted, we're in. Back left table. Near exit. I spotted her and Priya slip into their seats. Faces composed. Priya's posture said calm. Anna stayed very still the way people do when they've decided not to flinch. Somewhere else in the room. The 2 reporters I'd contacted were blending into the crowd. Their notebooks tucked into jackets like secret lives. At 7:06 p.m. The lights dimmed a polite 3 notches. A board member with the kind of voice that makes donors relax took the stage. He told a story about resilience. About weathering headwinds. About community. The slideshow behind him panned through images of forklifts at dawn and ribbon cuttings at noon. Everyone's smiling into a future that never seems to arrive. When he said, "And tonight, we honor a leader who embodies our deepest ideals." Polite applause rippled. I heard my own pulse in my ears. Mason waited in the wings. I could see him from where I stood, rolling his shoulders the way he used to before tip-off. His tie was a shade darker than his suit. A detail meant to say he had taste without trying. A woman near me whispered to her date, "He's even more handsome in person." And the date made a small noise of agreement. The kind that comes with investment statements. The board member lifted the cloth from the plaque with a flourish. "Please welcome," he said, "our Vice President of Operations, Mason Cole." Applause. Louder now. With a few whoops that wanted to sound like camaraderie and landed like permission. Mason stepped into the light. Smile calibrated to humble. "Thank you," he began, voice carrying easily. "Family means everything to me. Onque." The screen behind him showed a photo of us as kids. Both of us in matching sweaters on the front steps. A dog we'd had for 9 months before. Dad said it shed too much. My name wasn't in the caption. The room cooed. The tech booth's small light winked. The next slide jittered. Then steadied. Instead of the montage of company picnics we'd seen at rehearsal. The screen cut to black, with a single white title. Handled internally. The font was clean and unforgiving. A hush moved through the room as if someone had drawn a blanket over conversation. On stage. Mason paused. Blinked. And the smile held by muscle memory ticked a degree tighter. A grainy audio clip filled the speakers. The hallway one. A door slammed. Mason's voice, "I said we are not doing this." Not loud. But edged anyone who has lived inside a storm recognized the barometric drop. A small whimper threaded the sound. "What is this?" someone near the front muttered. A fork chimed against a plate. The tech booth light held steady. Committed. My father stood. "Cut the feed," he said. Low and firm. But the AV man pretended not to hear. Absorbed in a mixing board, he could have run in his sleep. The screen shifted an HR complaint form. Date stumpet. With red letters at the top, ISSUA handled internally. A second form. A third. Names blurred for privacy. Details. Legible. Shoulder. Shove. Inappropriate remarks during review. Threat regarding schedule. The forms moved like cards in a dealer's practiced hands. "Excuse me," Mason said into the microphone. Trying to laugh it off. "Seems we've got a file mix-up." His voice was lighter now. Looking for the room to join him and pretending. It didn't. People aren't as stupid as institutions hope. You could feel the audience lean forward. The way people do when a magician's sleeve slips. The next title card, family request. Then a scan of a school report with district letterhead. The narrative from Mrs. Klein. A red stamp along the bottom. Its plainness louder than any flourish. Case closed by board following family request. The board member on stage with Mason stared at the screen as if it had betrayed him personally. My father moved toward the tech booth. Yafset. From our table. Anna stood. She wasn't tall. But the room adjusted to her as if height were measured in resolve. She didn't ask for the microphone. She didn't need it. The silence did the work. "You hit me," she said, each word a stone placed carefully on the floor between them. "You hit our daughter." It wasn't dramatic. It was factual. Like reading an address. Murmurose. Quick and fidgety. Someone near the bar whispered. "Is this real?" A reporter stood. Phone angled low. Eyes steady. On stage. Mason shook his head. Palms out. "Anna," he said. Soft like apology. Hard like a directive. "Sit down. We can talk at home." "There is no at home," she said. And pressed play on her own phone. His voice filled the speakers. "No room for doubt. Now. You walk out and I take everything. I will bury you in court." The clank of a fist meeting wood. A child's cry. The board member stepped in front of the microphone as if to shield it. "Let's maintain decorum," he began. The word decorum sounding obscene. Under the circumstances. From the rear. A woman in a blue dress called out. "How many complaints did you bury?" Her voice shook. But the question didn't. The second reporter had her phone up now. Not hiding it. The red recording light like a tiny warning flare. My father reached the tech booth. Turn it off, he told the AV man. The tech looked from my father to the board member to the envelope still in his pocket, and shrugged the kind of shrug you see in men who have been told the truth privately and asked to do the opposite. The slideshow continued. Emails appeared, the ones with my father's initials in the margins. Please keep this quiet. Reputation cannot take another hit this quarter. We will manage this without formal escalation. Mason's voice. Softer. Now. Pleading the room instead of talking to it. This is out of context. But context is a luxury you earn by telling the truth. Not a tarp you throw over a fire. The room had that sticky feeling banquets get when the air can't move. Waiters froze mid-step. Holding trays heavy with plates. No one would finish. Even the chandelier bulbs seemed to buzz louder. I felt the moment to step forward and did. Not to make a speech. To add one missing brick. I took the aisle slowly, so I didn't become the story. And stopped a few feet from the stage where the cameras would see me as a person. Not a silhouette. The company holds a trust for me, I said. Voice steady because repetition had sanded it smooth. $2 million my mother left before I was born. It was supposed to be released when I turned 18. A rustle at the tables, numbers concentrate attention. My father is the trustee. He never told me it existed. And he emailed legal with a plan to claim it had been spent on my upbringing. Without receipts. Gasps don't really happen in real life. What happens is a collective intake of breath. A draft you can feel on your skin. The screen showed the trust's termination clause. The embossed seal. My name. Eyes moved as if on tracks from document to the man on stage, to the man in the aisle. My father's face. Watching me from the tech booth. Went blank in the way. A face goes blank when the next move hasn't been rehearsed. Security appeared at the edges of the room. Radios at their shoulders. Training, telling them to stabilize. One approached Anna. Priya stepped between them. Badge visible. Voice composed. We're leaving on our own. Don't touch her. The guard hesitated. Then nodded. Truth has a way of making even uniforms think twice. A board member at table 3 spoke to another. Phones began to light up with frenzied tapping. Someone at the press table asked. Not as a taunt but as a ledger entry. How long has the board known? No answer. The screen. Obedient to its schedule. Moved to the final card. I'd prepared questions for leadership. 3 bullet points in large font. Why were complaints closed at family request? Why was a trust withheld past its legal distribution date? What steps will you take tonight? Silence held. Then cracked. We need to adjourn. Someone said into a microphone that made every small fear sound official. But adjourn is not a race. The reporters were already walking toward the exit. Not running. Because running is for people who aren't sure. Priya guided Anna to the aisle. I met them near the doors. We moved without hurry, because hurry looks like guilt. As we reached the lobby, a hand caught my sleeve. A junior manager from the warehouse, a man I'd worked beside on night shifts. The one with the tattoo of a compass on his forearm, looked at me with an expression that mixed relief and anger into something usable. We wondered if anyone would ever say it out loud. He said. If you need statements, you'll have them. He pressed a folded paper into my palm, his own notes. Dates and times. Names. He had been keeping score too. Outside. The night air felt like waking up. Sirens sounded somewhere far away. The city doing what cities do. In the glass facade. Our reflections looked faintly doubled. Like we were already in 2 stories at once, the one the company had written. And the one we were writing now. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. I let it buzz. Then it buzzed again, texts. This time. From the reporters. We're filing. We'll need documents. Can you share tonight? Another from the pro bono attorney. Do not speak further without counsel present. You did well. Behind us. Through the doors. I could see the board huddled near the stage. A small island of suits under a banner that suddenly looked like a dare. My father stood with them. Shoulders square. Mouth align. Mason was off to the side. Hands on his hips. Eyes scanning the room for a camera he could charm. For the first time in years. I didn't feel smaller under their gaze. I felt correctly sized. Anna exhaled, so slowly I could hear it. What happens now? She asked. Now they try to contain. Priya said. And we don't let them. She touched Anna's elbow. A small contact that read like a promise. I checked that Anna had our folder of statements and that Priya had the spare drive. I texted the advocate to post the files if the company issued a denial by midnight. Then I put my hand on the lobby rail, cool and solid under my palm, and watched 3 letters being peeled off a banner by a frazzled event planner who had been told to fix the optics. The M in Morgan curled as it came away. Adhesive. Stretching like old gum. It dropped into a trash bag with a flat thud that carried across the marble. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt the taut calm you get when you've done exactly what you said you would do. And the consequences are arriving on schedule. We walked into the parking lot together. 3 people who had been told their experiences were misunderstandings, and who now had a soundtrack. A slideshow. A room that had heard them. My phone buzzed once more, an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. A clipped message, Mr. Cole. This is Detective Alvarez. We've received materials we need to discuss. Please return my call. We stood beside Priya's car while she dug for keys. Across the street. The hotel's sign flickered. One bulb failing. As if the building itself couldn't keep the story lit the way it wanted. Anna tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with fingers that didn't tremble anymore. He can't undo this, she said. Not to me or Priya, but to the part of herself that still needed to hear it out loud. He can't make it not have happened. No, I said. He can't. I looked back through the glass at a room full of people learning how quickly a narrative can change when a different set of slides appears. The doors hissed closed. The night held. We got in the car and drove. And for the first time, the silence between us felt like space. Not a wall. Detective Alvarez called again at 8:10 the next morning while the city was still the color of dishwater, and the street outside my window smelled faintly of bakery air vents. I answered on the second ring. His voice was measured. A tone that suggested he'd learned to be precise, because precision leaves less room for regret. Mr. Cole. We need formal statements from you. From Anna. And from the teacher who retained those documents. We'll also need copies of what you displayed last night. He didn't ask how I'd done it. He didn't threaten me with trespass statutes. He spoke like a man who knew that if you let the truth breathe for 12 hours, it starts to grow its own legs. By noon, we were in an interview room with cinderblock walls and a camera in the corner. Priya sat beside Anna. Hands folded. The right kind of witness. Mrs. Klein arrived with a tote and a thermos and something in her posture that read as relief disguised as resolve. I handed Detective Alvarez a neatly tabbed binder and a flash drive. He took them the way you take a baby, careful. Conscious of weight and responsibility. He asked questions the right way, time. Place. Who else was present? What happened next? He didn't ask the wrong questions. Why didn't you leave sooner? Why now? He knew better. Or he'd been taught. When we finished, he said, we've already contacted the hotel to secure the AV feed. The board member who tried to halt the presentation has counsel contacting us hourly. His mouth twitched in what might have been dry humor. Mr. Mason Cole will be asked to come in. If he declines, we'll act accordingly. I left the station and drove home with the windows cracked because the air felt heavy. On my kitchen table, the plan had become clutter, sticky notes curling at the corners. Highlighters. Unkept. Coffee rings like small eclipses. I cleaned it all with a sudden, practical urge. I stacked the papers. Capped the pens. Put the lemon magnet back on the fridge so it held up Lila's drawing straight. The ritual steadied me more than sleep had. By late afternoon, the news cycle had shifted from whispers to headlines. The local paper ran with a tempered piece that used words like alleged and under investigation and still managed to sound like a siren. The regional outlet posted a longer read with document images blurred just enough to protect names spelled right and dates cross-checked. The comment sections did what comment sections do. But the reporting was clean. A board member I'd never met issued a statement about taking these matters very seriously. The corporate equivalent of putting a pot of water on a grease fire and hoping it doesn't splash. Within 24 hours, the company suspended Mason, pending a thorough review. I learned this not from a press release, but because 3 texts arrived from warehouse friends. They took his badge. Security walked him out. He tried to smile. The same hour, my father stepped down temporarily. A word that tried to feel sturdy and came off like a folding chair. He stood next to a bank of microphones and said phrases about commitment to culture. About families being complicated. About honoring processes. The cameras caught a muscle in his cheek jerk. The tiniest tremor in a man who prefers everything bolted down. On day 3. An officer rang my buzzer just after lunch. "Mr. Cole. We have a writ," he said. Polite. Practiced. It wasn't for me. It was for records from my father's home office devices. Files. The drawer with the envelopes labeled in his tidy block print. As the door clicked shut behind them, I stood very still in the empty apartment and listened to the hum of the fridge again. For the first time. It sounded like a neutral thing. Not a witness. On day 5. Detective Alvarez left a message I saved and listened to twice. "We have enough to move," he said. "We've taken Mr. 5. Cole into custody on charges of assault and intimidation. Additional counts pending. We expect to speak to the district attorney about charges related to obstruction." I called him back and said thank you. Aware it was a strange thing to say in this context. He said, "People who keep records make my job possible." I knew he didn't mean me alone. The fallout came from my mother in a different, cuter way. She wasn't arrested. She was disinvited. The charity boards she chaired thanked her for her service and removed her headshot from their websites. The woman who used to organize the silent auction wine table saw her at the grocery store and turned the cart down a different aisle. When I saw my mother a week later, she looked like someone who had placed her life on a high shelf and could no longer reach it. We met in the church courtyard behind the house where I grew up because she said she couldn't face seeing me in the foyer with the photograph wall still intact. I didn't know about the trust, she began. And I believed her. I knew about the other thing. She couldn't say affair. Couldn't call me what that word would require her to call herself and my father. I told myself it was a mistake adults made. And then we make do. Her voice wavered at make do. I thought protecting the family meant smoothing, making sure nothing spilled. I thought that was love. It isn't, I said. Not to punish, but to place a marker. Love doesn't require anyone else to disappear. She nodded. Looked down at the mulch. At a single green shoot shouldering up like stubborn hope. "I see that now," she said. "Too late for too many things." She reached for my forearm and stopped short. Then let her hand fall. "I'm sorry for what I was complicit in by keeping quiet." The sentence landed without grace. I said, "Thank you for saying it." Because gratitude sometimes has to be the hinge if you want the door to move at all. We didn't attempt more. We weren't ready. The company rebranded inside of a week the way people dye their hair after a breakup fast. Dramatic. Insisting this time it will be different. The signage came down in stages. The first day they removed the banner above the lobby. A worker swore when the adhesive stripped the paint. The second day, they detached the enormous letters on the roof. I drove past on the third day and watched a crew in hard hats unscrew the M from Morgan with the careful boredom of professionals. They slid it into a crane sling. The strap slipped, the M bumped the side of the building, and then swung down into the dumpster with a metallic clang that ricocheted in the still afternoon. The sound startled a flock of pigeons into flight. I stood on the sidewalk and felt all the years rearrange themselves around that noise. Anna texted me a photo that night, Lila asleep with a stuffed fox tucked under her arm. A pale stripe of streetlight on her cheek like a benediction. She slept through. The message read, "First time in months." I typed and erased 3 replies because nothing seemed to fit the size of it. Finally I wrote, "That's everything." She answered with a single heart. Then, a minute later, "Thank you." I stared at the screen and shook my head even though she couldn't see me. "You did that," I said out loud to the quiet room. "You walked." The trust didn't untangle overnight. Nothing real does. My pro bono attorney now replaced by a retained one who insisted on calling me Ethan. Not Mr. Cole. As if to remind me, I was still a person in this process filed motions. We sought an accounting. Demanded records of distributions that supposedly occurred. The bank responded with letters that said they would comply, while not quite complying. My father's counsel argued that the funds had been used for my maintenance and education. As anticipated. We requested proof. The DA's office took an interest when it became clear that numbers didn't line up with tuition paid or rent covered. And that no paper trail wasn't just a phrase in an email but a strategy. It will be a long road. But the first milemaker went up when a judge ordered a freeze pending review. I looked at the order and felt oddly calm. The money was never going to fix the wound. But making the ledger tell the truth matters. Reporters called with follow-ups. I learned how to say no comment without grinding my teeth. People from the warehouse sent me screenshots of internal messages, an anonymous hotline number set up overnight. An invite to a listening session. A new policy requiring two-person review of HR complaints. It's easy to be cynical about those things. It's also fair to note that a small mechanism moves differently once you oil it. One night at Nitrediva. A text came from a number I didn't recognize. I'm the one who filed 3 complaints last year. Thank you for not letting them make me into a problem to be solved. I sat with that a long time. Letting it carve out a space inside me for something that wasn't anger. Priya kept being exactly who she was from the first moment, brisk. Kind. Unsentimental. She took Anna to appointments. To meet with a legal advocate about protection orders. To look at apartments with locks that felt sturdy. At the hearing, Anna stood before a judge with a clerk who had already seen everything and still managed to look at her like a human being. The order was granted. Mason didn't show. His attorney did. And frowned mightily. And left quickly. As for my father, the day he was formally charged with obstruction, I sat on the same porch steps we'd posed on in those matching sweaters. The wood had been repainted a dozen times since then. The grain still showed through if you looked at an angle. A neighbor I didn't know well walked by with a terrier and said, "Weather's turning." And I agreed, because it was, and because sometimes the simplest statement is the truest one available. A week after the gala, an unknown number called while I was parked outside the shuttered company store watching a man with a power washer take the last of the logo off the glass. I didn't answer. The voicemail icon blinked. I let it sit while the spray arced. While the letters that had claimed permanence melted into gray water and ran down the sidewalk into a storm drain. The phone buzzed again, a text this time from Alvarez. "You may see an arrest on the evening news. Don't watch it if you don't want to." I didn't. I made pasta and ate standing up and listened to the radiator chatter. People ask me if I felt vindicated. I told them the truth. I felt accurate. I felt the way you feel when you finally say the correct name for a thing you've been mislabeling for years. I slept better. But not in a triumphant way. More in the way of a person whose ceiling no longer drips because someone fixed the roof. And the quiet feels almost too loud at first. Sometime in that second week, I drove by the warehouse at dusk. When the sky goes that deep, forgiving blue, workers were coming out in waves. Laughing. Shoulders nodding as they crossed the lot. A man with the compass tattoo lifted a hand when he recognized me. "You did right," he called. "Don't let them make you think you didn't." The sentence stuck to me like a well-placed patch. On the way home, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Maybe a reporter. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe an old friend deciding which side of the story to stand on. I let it go. For the first time in years. My hands weren't shaking on the wheel. My chest wasn't tight. The dashboard clock ticked over to 7:00. The streetlights blinked on in obedient sequence. Somewhere back in the city, someone would be putting a child to bed without flinching at footsteps in the hall. That mattered more than any headline. They called me dramatic my whole life. They said I misread rooms. Took things personally. Turned ordinary roughness into a monologue about harm. Maybe I did. Sometimes. Maybe I learned early that paying attention keeps you alive. Standing at my window that night, I watched a moth throw itself once. Twice. Against the pane, and then find the open air. I breathed in and out until the breath felt unremarkable. The mustard jar in my parents' fridge was probably still there. A prop in a story that no longer held me. I didn't need to open their door to find out. I turned off the kitchen light and let the quiet be what it was. Not a verdict. Not a threat. Just the sound of a life that had finally stopped asking permission to exist.